So that's been a bit of an overview of some WA experiences. I think we've got a few minutes for some questions. So any questions to Rino, Don or Melinda, if you'd like to come forward, the three speakers, and we'll facilitate some questions. Yes, there's one here.
John Wiley's my name. I'm from a local council here, and the work you're doing is fabulous. I think it's really commendable. What I'm interested in is just from the governance side, could somebody give us a snapshot? I mean, it's one thing to be able to successfully purify water, if I can use those simple terms, and then put it into the aquifer. Who manages it and who maintains it, or what's the plan? You know, does private enterprise utilities come up and apply for, you know, permission to do this, and then how is it monitored? Because if a mistake is made, it could have some pretty big ramifications. A snapshot of how you handle it.
I'll answer that for groundwater. I'll answer that for the groundwater replenishment.
Thank you.
We'll manage that. So the Water Corporation. So we have a series of monitoring bores at various points. You know, for example, they might be 5 metres to 10, 20, and then kilometres away, and we'll continue to monitor if there's any adverse results. But we're also monitoring that treated water storage, all the regulatory samples. But there's no other deals. It's us that controls, or not controls, but will operate that scheme.
So if I can, as it grows, you will need to grow. In the group you have monitoring it, it could become a fairly increased activity.
Yeah, and we're already monitoring that scheme now. So we won't grow. We may develop more monitoring bores and take more samples, but that's pretty much an operational regime.
So the treatment train, will that change when you're upscaling, like 2016?
In terms of, because the trial was successful, so we'll opt for a similar process.
One, Neil?
What do you expect the cost for the treated water, 7 gigalitres per annum, so what do you expect the cost for that per litre, and then what's the charge actually from the per water user?
So going back to the cost, there's we would, as a rough order of magnitude, we looked at the 28 gigalitre scheme, so the full scheme, and we compared that to desalination. So desal's around $1 billion, and with the groundwater replenishment, you're probably looking at 500 million. So it's about half the cost of desal because of the infrastructure. Basically, you've got the wastewater treatment plant and a recharge aquifer. With desal, there's a lot of infrastructure to plumb into your existing mains and so forth. So that's the savings.
So for your re-injection, are you getting an additional allocation to take that amount of water out of the system?
That still needs to be negotiated. Maybe, Greg, if you...
Yeah, at this stage, for the first 7 gigalitres, the modelling shows that'll be a 1-for-1 exercise. Beyond that, there's still some further work to be done, and that'll be informed by the further monitoring and further modelling. But for the first 7 gigalitres, we're comfortable with the 1-for-1. And there's a licensing arrangement to cover that.
And will that 7 gigalitres all come from the one bore 5 kilometres away? Is that sustainable, or do we need bores that are closer to? How will it be? And even the 28, the full scheme, how will that? Because you went to the community and said it's going to be a 5 kilometre travel zone, even though most of the treatment would occur very close. Has there modelling been done to look at the recovery of that?
So the 5 kilometres, travelling time is because we've got an existing production bore in place. Yeah. So and the aquifer already exists within that area. So in terms of the extra the recharge bores, so as the scheme grows, there'll be multiple recharge.
No, the extraction. I mean, where would the extraction of that occur?
From an existing catchment where we already have production bores in place. So that will take many decades. So modelling shows. So for example, over the 3 years, with what we've 2.5 gigalitres, it only travelled 240 metres.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So it's actually ASTR, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
For storage transfer.
Yeah, it is. It'll take time, so it's not direct or Is that
Yeah,
answer your question?
I'm just wondering, because it's a lot of extra water to take out in terms of you're not actually really extracting the water that you put in really, probably over many decades, but in terms of the pressure transfer.
Sure, there's a redistribution of the water that'll go on, and that's accepted within the licensing regulatory regime. Yep. But I should explain there's a huge number of production bores already within the Nandgarra Mound as part of the integrated water supply system.
I understand that at this stage it's very important for you, because of public acceptance, to treat the water to a great extent and then inject it to the aquifer. So what you are not considering is the potential of treatment coming from the aquifer. So would it be the case in the future that you may consider treatment, natural treatment? As we said, 250, what moves through the aquifer, it can be treated, and all the viruses, bacteria, those contaminants, most of them can be eliminated. So, and then it would, I'm just also wondering how much cost benefit it would have if we can demonstrate that, in fact, aquifer can be considered as a treatment.
Yeah, so in terms of our policies and what's done elsewhere, is that we didn't want to necessarily, because it's a relatively new process, we didn't want to necessarily just play around with the aquifer. So our approach is to bring it to that drinking water standards and then recharge. So we didn't want nature to do the purification process.
So how
Because
much
there's so many
cost do you
unknowns.
think that advanced treatment, how much cost is it associated with that advanced treatment, that you have UV or other components?
Yeah, like I said, it's in terms of the 28 gigalitres, compared to desal, it's half the cost of desal.
Tom, do you want to make?
Yeah, I think the one that I was trying to outline is addressing exactly what you're talking about, which is looking at non-potable use and just taking water and treating it as much and letting the soil and the aquifer do the treatment. And that work that we did at Florida for about 5 or 6 years showed that in fact there were substantial improvements in water quality as it moved through the soil and the aquifer. And if you can put it in through infiltration galleries, like Joe was showing earlier on, it can happen under gravity. So there's no pumps involved and things like that, except to get the water to those galleries. But if you let gravity do your infiltration and the soil and the aquifer do the treatment, we think we can get the costs right down so that industry and then other users can use it. So it's exactly that same point you make.
I think there's an interesting, just in terms of that Western Australian experience, in terms of moving through the public acceptance. So there's certainly sort of a risk approach taken, or in this case a very low risk approach taken, to be able to get that higher level of public acceptance at this point in time. John, you had a question, I think.
You referred to having had very high groundwater levels in the Peel Harbour yet some years. To what extent was that a function of over-irrigation and the use of open channels now replaced by pipelines, and with the Water Corporation taking back some of the water entitlements from the growers, versus the significance of the water coming from the ranges? So is the irrigation issue minor bickies, I suppose, compared?
In the area that we looked at is very much minor bickies. There's not very much irrigation at all. The water that sits on the surface most winter is just the regional groundwater table that fills up like a bucket each year. And the flood waters that come down from the scarp, they basically sort of just go all over through the drainage network that has been provided for the farmers because it's a predominantly rural area, and there's a rule that back in the 1940s that farmland can't be inundated for more than 72 hours. So the drainage networks are still predominantly open drains in that area that just filter off the water after a few days in a big flood.
Perhaps one last question.
Just on that public acceptance issue, would it be fair to say that one of the keys of that high level of public acceptance, around that 90%, is the fact that you are treating that water to such a high quality before you inject it, and it's also, the modelling suggests it's going to take 200 years before it actually gets to your injected water gets to your physical extraction wells and everything?
Yeah, look, there's probably many factors, and just to give you an example in terms of the community response, there was an article in March of 2013, the Sunday Times, that came up with the front page of the Sunday Times saying, "Potty Perth, Water Corp's been injecting treated wastewater and you're drinking it, Perth." But we had very little response in terms. Well, we thought there's going to be P1s and community outlash and so forth, but we had very little response. And I guess given that the community are aware that it is a drying climate, I think they are looking at us doing whatever we can to have safe drinking water.
Well, I'm mindful of time, and there's still several questions, but I think we'll probably have to move on. But can we just thank the three presenters?